So, like Ophelia said, my name is Carrie Ortel, and this time last year, I was transitioning from just having defended my PhD dissertation to starting a new job as an assistant professor. So this is all extremely fresh for me, and I'm happy to have this opportunity. I'm going to share a lot of personal information because this topic is personal. So bear with me as I kind of get through this a little bit, but please ask questions as they come up. So, if I had to summarize all of my advice into one slide, it's probably going to be this. So, the most important thing is for you to be communicating with your advisor about what their expectations are. And so, every advisor and every university expects a little bit different as far as what your assistantship entails and what classes you'll need to take in order to be successful, how to write your thesis, how to structure your thesis, how defenses go. These things are all a little bit different at different universities. And so, my biggest piece of advice for you is to make sure that you're communicating with your advisor to really understand what your situation involves and what your expectations are. And so, with that, and focusing on the writing side of this, really asking them and coming up with a plan about how your advisor wants to review your documents is going to be really helpful. So I have a picture of my two advisors here. So this is Dr. Ozzie Abai, who is my undergraduate advisor at Virginia Tech, and then Dr. Trent Roberts, who is my graduate advisor for both my master's and PhD at the University of Arkansas. And these folks wanted entirely different things and are very different people. And so it's really hard to categorize what you should be doing to be successful into one pot. And really it comes down to making sure that you ask them what works for the two of you. And so it really comes down to, do they want small pieces of writing? Do they want an outline first? Do they want you to just dive in and then send you what you've got at the end of your chapter? Coming up with those plans to make sure that you're on track and succeeding is really important. My advice is small chunks, and so that way you don't spend an entire semester writing a whole chapter that maybe is off in the wrong direction. So making sure to have some check-in points with them and getting feedback throughout the process, I think would be very helpful and important. And then also involving committee members early on is something that I really recommend. So for me, I actually ended up having what we called a pre-proposal meeting for both my master's and my PhD projects. And so we ended up forming my committee and inviting all of my committee members in for a very casual discussion about the methodology of my research before I got to the point of even writing my proposal, just to make sure that we were all on the same page. And just forming those relationships with your committee members will be helpful because ultimately that committee, as well as your advisor, is there to support you and support your success. And so checking in with them more frequently would definitely be ideal. And I know that can be a little bit daunting, especially for folks that are maybe at an AREC or at a different location, so you don't see them every day. But I think that's all the more reason that it is important to have that communication established. And then also, this goes along with the communications, but if you have a journal in mind for where you plan on publishing your research, that will be very helpful to establish early on because then you can follow the journal's guidelines as well as your graduate school's guidelines for your thesis and dissertation and tailor it to that journal. So that way, when you get to the final point of being able to submit to a journal for publication, you don't have to restructure everything. Your citations are in the right format. These are all very little things now that turn into big things later on if you have to change them. And so keeping that in mind early on would definitely be a piece of advice that I have. So I'll leave some breaks if y'all want to interject some of what works for you. I would be very very appreciative of that. But what I also wanted to share is that what I do is I set goals for myself and to try and hold myself accountable. And so these goals are flexible, right? So you don't share these goals with everybody. But if you have a timeline for yourself, that helps you recognize maybe you're behind your timeline. And so it's time to pick things up and really focus on it. Or maybe you're ahead of your timeline. And so if you need a break and need to step away, take a break and step away. And so having some goals for yourself and holding yourself accountable is going to be really important. And really just breaking down these large tasks. So, if I told you to go and write your proposal, that is such a large task that is so daunting and is very difficult to start. And so if you can say, okay, well, instead of just saying, I'm going to sit down and write my proposal, maybe you can say, okay, well, this week I'm going to sit down and I'm going to look at literature reviews and look at other people's proposals. So that way I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And then next week I'm going to make an outline and then starting to kind of plan. So what I have is I have a paper planner and I write down this week's goal is to maybe make my outline for the paper that I'm trying to write. And then next week's goal is going to be, okay, now I'm going to start looking at writing the materials and methods because now I have a little bit more of a plan. And so by the end of the semester, you've got your whole proposal without having to sit down with such a daunting task about a large assignment. So within that, my ultimate suggestion is to read one paper a day. And that actually sounds really easy, but if you think about it, when you're reading a journal article, it takes a lot of time to sit down and really read it and digest it and make sure you understand what the point of that article is. So that way you've not just read it, but you know that article. And so my suggestion is instead of trying to read 10 articles in a day, so that way you can cite all 10 articles, focus on one article a day, spend a whole hour or more on that article to make sure that you really understand it. And then that way, when you go forward, now you can say, oh, yeah, I'm going to cite Bender et al. Here. And then you can reference it and say, yes, that's right, I'm going to do that. But you don't have to continually go back to these same articles and check them. So I really think, one article a day. And if you talk about doing that for several weeks, several months, several years, that's really going to add up to a lot of literature that you're aware of. And ultimately, that's going to help you along the way in writing, in coming up with ideas, knowing what's out there and what's not out there. And so, this starts with some older literature. But then as you get further and further with this, now you're able to keep up with what's being published in a very timely fashion. And so that's really helpful as we're talking about writing our dissertations and having good citations. And ultimately, that's my biggest suggestion. Now, I am a big hypocrite by saying that because that's actually very difficult to do and I'm not able to do it. But if you can do that for 3 or 4 days out of the week, that's excellent. I mean, my goal is every week to have done that for 4 articles. So there's going to be a day you miss it and maybe you miss it for multiple days, but trying to have that goal is critical because when we lose that goal, then we really don't do this. And then all of a sudden months go by without having read an article and we're out of date. And so that's my biggest suggestion. But ultimately just breaking big tasks down into smaller tasks is something that really helps me. And then planning it on my planner. And taking breaks because there's going to be waves of productivity. And so sometimes I'm really on it. I'm doing great. I'm excelling. And then something comes up and pulls me away and I've got to focus on something else. That is going to happen and that's okay. So making sure that you have a plan and there's a little bit of buffer room within that plan. So that way, if you get pulled away to go what we call going downstate and planting trials, or if you get pulled away to go to a conference and all of a sudden all of these things pile up in 1 month, that's okay because you've got some buffer in your plan and so you can still stay on track. That's really important. So getting into the details, I highly suggest that if you're not using a citation manager, that you start using one. So I'll ask the Zoom here, who uses a citation manager and which citation manager do you recommend? I use Mendeley and I'm open to y'all's suggestions.
I actually use this paper pile. It's like a Chrome extension app. And what's nice about that is it like basically like when you have an extension, you can just read article and if you want to add that article, you can just basically kind of like import into the app, like the extension in Chrome, and it automatically searches it and pulls it into your like giant compilation and it formats it so if you want to get the citation for it in your paper, it automatically like generates it for you. So it's really, really convenient.
That's excellent. That's very similar to what Mendeley does for me, but I think the key there is that it formats that citation for you because otherwise that becomes it's a frustrating task. It's not hard, but when you have to do it for many, many citations, it becomes much easier to just have that citation manager handle that for you. So I really love that, Ophelia. It sounds like a great one. I actually didn't even know about it, so that's even better. My suggestion is whichever one you pick, you want to be very careful in picking it because try and stick with it. So one of the reasons that I use Mendeley is it's free, and so I started this many, many years ago. And as my emails have changed through different universities, I can still use that Mendeley account. And so I have more information in that Mendeley account than I would like to, but it's all there. And so I'll actually just share that screen if I can and show you kind of a little bit about it. So can y'all see my Mendeley account? Okay, perfect. So what I like about this is this has everything in here. So I've got different folders for different topics that I've researched along the way. If I wanted to search, let's see, let's just search soybean because that's what we're talking about today. So if I wanted to do that, and then maybe this is the article I'm looking for. Hopefully I've annotated this. So I have not, but that's okay. The point I'm trying to make is that you can add notes to it. You can highlight sections. You can so that's really helpful to have your notes. So that way, the next time you go back, so after you spend your hour plus on this article, now you can go back to it and see what your thoughts were the first time that you read it. So a lot of great things. And then I can also right click and say copy formatted citation. So that's really helpful to just copy and paste it into whatever article you are writing or using there. So a lot of great things with Mendeley, but whatever you choose, just try and make sure that you can stick with it because if you're a master's student now thinking about getting your PhD, that's going to be really helpful to have all of your master's papers right there. So yeah, I think that's the main topic there. And really, I think my biggest suggestion as well is, the more you read, the better you will become at writing. And writing is probably the hardest thing for all of us. And so this is a difficult topic to give suggestions on because we all have to figure out what works for us and use that to your advantage. So once you figure out what works for you, you need to do that. And then as you read more and more papers, you'll pick up on these patterns and on these trends that you like and that you think are very easy to understand and make a good article. And so as you pick up on those trends, you'll also become a much better writer. And I'll share, one of my top things that I do is I'm a morning person. So if I'm working on a big paper, I'll get up at 5 a.m. because that's my mental hour. And basically I'll get up and I'll write from 5 to 8. And by 8 o'clock in the morning, I am done for the day. I'm not writing. I'll take my dog on a walk, and then I'll go start my day and show up to the lab a little bit later. But basically, whatever hour of the day is your hour, you need to block yourself off and use that in your advantage. If I try and start writing at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, it's absolutely useless. When I open that page the next day, it's all going to be deleted. And so finding what works for you with timing and everything is so important. And then also finding things like this. So this is tips for writing an abstract from the Tri-Society's website. And this is from if you were to go submit either a poster or an oral presentation, you'll find this in their website there. And I think it is extremely helpful. I go back to this tips for writing an abstract paper every time I write an abstract because it really tells you exactly how to format it and how to write a good abstract. And so I really recommend that as a source. But summarizing this all, first and foremost, communicate with your advisor. So that cannot be overstated enough. Making sure that you're aware of what their expectations are and that you're meeting them. And if you need to adjust what you're doing to make sure you're meeting your expectations is really, really important. And then also hold your own self accountable and set your own goals. And one of the things that I really recommend is that goal of reading one paper a day, because if you start doing that now, even if you're graduating in May of this semester, you can have a lot of papers read by May. So I highly recommend that. But ultimately, this boils down to ways to make your defense easier is to try and defend a well-written thesis. So it is very difficult to defend something that is poorly written, and it is very easy to defend something that is well written. So spending the time now and investing in yourself to become a better writer is going to help you in so many regards, but it's also going to help you on that one big day that it really matters. So I know that that's daunting, but it's also very important. And invest in yourself now and use the libraries at your grad school that are available to you. Most universities have librarians that are there to help you. They have short sessions and lectures about how to become a better writer. They can help you with finding things in the library. And so use those resources because once you graduate, all of a sudden you're going to really wish you did when you don't have those resources available anymore. So every university is a little bit different about what that is, but please look into what you have available to you and do use them.